Oh, beg your pardon, Susan. I had you muted.
Oops. Oh, sorry about that.
Okay, go ahead.
Anyway, yeah. The title of this presentation is Emotional Intelligence. It's Not an Oxymoron. And so many people, I'm not sure how many folks were doing some of this reading in the 90s. Let's see, my screen doesn't seem to be, oh, there we go. Sorry about that. But back in the 90s, I was designing telecommunication systems, and I remember reading some of Goldman's articles, and I kept thinking, my thought was, emotions, feelings don't belong in the workplace. And, you know, things have changed a great deal since the 90s. We have different business models. We have new technologies where people are encouraged to be collaborative and you know, work together. And we're starting, I just saw a book that talked a little bit about that type A personalities, type A leadership was passé, and the leaders of the 21st century were going to be those closet betas, you know, the people that are servant leaders that have those kind of skill sets, more supportive, servant leader, collaborative. So what I wanted to cover in this session is, well, let's just define emotional intelligence. Let's get a baseline. And it does come back. I'm a project manager by nature. I've done a little bit of quality work, but I'm sure you all have at the end of the day, the important part is it's the people. It's the people that assure the quality. It's the people that really make a difference in the project management world. And so as we're doing that, since it is about us, it is about human beings, what kind of leadership qualities can we hone? You know, how can we take some of these elements of emotional intelligence? And there have been some more research and some new assessments, and I think some of you might have seen if you looked through it, it's now Emotional Intelligence 2.0, where it's gone from a 4-element model to a 5-element model. But we'll spend most of our conversation talking about what are those elements and how do we as leaders leverage them to make our work and our team positive and constructive. So the very first part is I really am not a big fan of long definitions. When I think about emotional intelligence, I define it as a procedural paradigm. It's how people view and react to the world around them. And there is a woman, Rita Quarter. I'm not sure if any of you have seen her. She's a journalist, and she reports on neuroscience. I'm a closet geek, I admit it. And she wrote an article about mapping the mind from a book that was, anyway, in her book, Mapping the Mind, her definition of emotions is that they're not feelings, but a set of body-rooted survival mechanisms. And what happens is we use these mechanisms that tell us, you know, that's our gut. We never can put anything tangible on that gut, and because we can't define it, we can't measure it, so often in business we're a little bit afraid to say, well, that's what my gut tells me. But that's what the emotions are. And so when we're thinking about our emotions, it's not just a feeling, but it's what turns us away from danger and propels us forward. So some of you might even want to click in the chat if you've ever known a leader who was just fabulous. If they called you and almost, you know, said, I need you tomorrow, and I know there'll be exceptions, that you would just show up because they were such fabulous leaders. You learned a lot. You made positive things happen. But could you tell why you would follow that person, why you would, you know, when they said, I need you, John, why you would head out? It's sort of intangible. So maybe if anybody wants to click in the chat, have you ever had a leader that you would just You can say yes or no. Have you ever had a leader that you would just follow and almost anywhere? And Christopher, you've put yourself out there. If I can ask you, was there something specific about that leader that you could put your finger on that you'd want to share with us why you thought so highly of that person? And you can say no thank you if you'd prefer not. Let's see, Norval, can we get Christopher off mute? Or
Yeah, Chris is off mute now. Go ahead, Chris.
Sure. So it was just a connection that an individual had with me. It's just the way that we interacted, the way that I don't know, we thought the same way. That it basically they would have this connection with me emotionally, and we would be in conversations and thinking the same way, and almost going down the same pathway. Just the way we connected on an emotional level was very unusual from other situations I've been in.
exactly, and you use that phrase emotional. You couldn't really measure it, but it was there, and it's powerful, and it's very, very strong. And so that's when we look at emotional intelligence and where some of the research has gone, the exciting part is we can put metrics, we can measure it. And that's what we'll be chatting about before. Chris, thank you so much. So the second part is, I told you I'm a science geek, just a little bit, what makes us human? Why is it that we are looking at emotional intelligence, and why is it so important, and what sets us apart, from other mammals? For example, we have opposable thumbs, but so do many great apes. We have stereosight, which is three-dimensional vision. I'm learning horses are very intelligent animals, but they don't have three-dimensional vision. They cannot see specifically in front of their nose. They can only see on the sides of their head. So having that three-dimensional vision is a power that we as humans have over other intelligent mammals. We have language that lets us accumulate knowledge and culture and wisdom. So much of what we've passed down have been stories and around the campfire and sagas. And the last part, because we can't ever tell. The horses and cats and dogs and apes are all social beings and probably have a language we don't understand. But one thing that we can do that other mammals we haven't been able to see, at least in our language, is the ability to simulate the future. And that short-term versus long-term, being able to understand that I'm giving up something in the short term to get a greater gain in the long term is something that is particular to human beings. So that if we're looking at our brain, and that's where our emotional intelligence lies, it's down in the prefrontal cortex. So if you take your hand, make a fist so your thumb is on the outside of your fingers, where your thumb is your prefrontal cortex. And that's the largest part of our brains right now. So if we were an amoeba, you don't really have a brain stem, and so all you can feel is temperature. And then some basic creatures, some snakes and things, have a brain stem so they can tell their location. And I mentioned horses and cats and sheep and apes, they all have, if you've gone back to your fist and you're looking at the top of it and go straight down, in the middle of your brain is the limbic system. And that's where the social relationships are. But other mammals do not have the prefrontal cortex. And so that's how we manage time for long-term and short-term. And that's one of the steps when we talk about emotional intelligence, is how we handle flexibility and stress, and we can balance all of that out. But why don't we, start to get back a little bit more into definitions. There are also two types of intelligence. We have cognitive intelligence and emotional intelligence. And I'm sure many of you, if not all of us, took that SAT when we were 17. Does anybody, the reason why we do that is because at the age of 17, our rote learning is at its peak. We're able to memorize as much as we're going to memorize at age 17. It doesn't mean that when we get to 21, we're in the hole, but just that potential for rote learning remains constant. I had teenagers, and when they got to be teenagers, my short-term memory just went I lost it. But at 17, you've got your full rote learning memory going on. Emotional intelligence, on the other hand, I often describe as wisdom, because very often the psychometricians that have done all this research feel uncomfortable measuring or testing anybody under the age of 18. There's a reason out there. I have a 23-year-old who's still a knucklehead, and there was a woman who gave a wonderful little news snippet on NPR where she had two teenage boys, and she found herself saying, "What were you thinking?" Any of you with teenage children might have said the same thing. And she said, "Wait, I'm a neuroscientist. I can figure this out." And what she discovered is that people's brains don't close. Young women's brains close in their late teens, and young men's brains close in their middle 20s. And so, that's where the emotional intelligence comes in, is as you gain experience, as your brain closes, as the synapses don't fall anywhere, we're able to improve, in our intention, our ability to grow, our ability to adapt. And so that's where, somebody once, I was in my 40s, and a 20-something was saying, "Susan, nothing upsets you." And I said, "Well, it's all, what's the worst?" We were in a class together. I said, "We get a B." But for that person in their 20s, a B versus an A was a really big deal. By the time you've had kids and you've had other life experiences, getting a B is not a big deal. So that's where you, kind of get perspective across all of that. So even now, as we are adults and we're working, in our working lives, we still need to use our cognitive sides of our brains, and we still need to use but as we're using more and more emotional intelligence. And so what I was hoping is you could just take a moment and think about maybe an activity that you worked on in the last week, and what part of that activity was cognitive, and what part of that activity might have been an emotional intelligence. So we're looking at cognitive intelligence versus emotional. If there's anybody that would like to share their example, if you want to ping us, Norval will help us unmute you.
Yes, if you'd like to be unmuted, let me know by typing into the chat box. I'll be watching it.
Let's see, we've gotten some already. Gloria? Oh, and thank you, Gloria. Gloria jumped back, and if you're watching the text, she commented on her leader. Is there anybody that would want to pipe up with a cognitive experience or an emotional intelligent experience? All right, I'll give you an example. How about when you go to the grocery store and you decide that you need to get a headache remedy. Now, I'll be very honest, I've read all the medical reports, and I know that the generic brand for Advil, Tylenol, Excedrin, the generic brands, if they have the same major ingredient, are all, you know, just as powerful as the name brands. And so when I'm looking, however, I get really awful headaches when the weather changes. And I have found that the only drug that works for me is real Excedrin, not the generic Excedrin. So that's my cognitive versus emotional intelligence. The cognitive is, I know that I could save 2 to 5 cents a tablet if I would buy the generic brand. And I do that for Advil or Tylenol for, you know, muscle issues. But if I want to cure my headache, then I make that emotional decision. I have no idea why. I think I need to see Excedrin. There's no reason why I shouldn't. But it's my emotional, you know, that, you know, I'm making that decision for other non-cognitive reasons that Excedrin works better for me. Have any of you made those types of decisions? I'm going to guess yes. So let's talk a little bit more about emotional intelligence, because emotional intelligence is really, when we talk about that with leaders, and you start to talk about those gut-rooted feelings and the survival that we were using in that definition, Daniel Goleman is probably noted as the person that really first brought emotional intelligence into the popular culture, into the business world in the mid-90s. In the 2000s, he wrote a book with Richard Boyatzis, who's also done a fair amount of research, in Anne McKee, and their book, Primal Leadership, in 2013, takes a look at emotional intelligence in leaders, and they say that in any human group, you know, the leader is the one who, you know, who others look toward for assurance and clarity. And I think what Gloria had mentioned in her definition, what Chris had mentioned in his definition, you know, these are the leaders when in tumultuous times, you know, we're confident that we're going to have to work hard, but if we're working with them and following their direction, we're going to get through the rough waters and, you know, achieve what we want. And so then it comes back to, you know, what are the qualities of these people and how do we measure these qualities? You know, part of what the qualities are when we look at leaders and we look at strong leaders is that they have the ability to pay attention to what's important, inhibit what isn't important, and most importantly, they keep their team current and on track. And this is what I call that neural GPS. You know, have any of you come up against road construction and you can't turn left where you're supposed to, and you've got to go down a block and go around the block? And you know, in your cognitive mind, you know you're going to get back going in the correct direction, but you've got to take a detour, and you're fine. But your GPS in your automobile is not so fine that you miss that left turn. And does your GPS go half-cocked? They're like, make a legal U-turn. Go make a legal U-turn. And so that's what a leader is. You know, the leader looks up, sees the bigger picture. That's the part of you that says, there's road construction. I have to go down a block. You'll either go right, you'll go left, whatever you're supposed to do. And so that's what leaders do. But it's not so easy to just pay attention to what's important because we have lots of other noise going on. And so what we have to do as leaders is learn how to filter out the noise. And once we figure out what's important, then we have to communicate it to the team. We then also have to do some negotiation to let folks know when they've got working on activities that might be important to them, but it's not important to the team's mission, that they're wasting time and need to focus. And that's where, we're keeping the teams on track. So Dr. Henry Cloud wrote a wonderful book called Boundaries for Leaders, where I took these last two slides from. If any of you are interested, he gives you the permission to say no, which is really wonderful. So if you're feeling a little overwhelmed and a little overworked, he also gives some great hints how to delegate as leaders so you can focus on your work. But he also recognizes, and this is the benefit, why do we want to work extra hard as leaders? Why do we want to take the time to help people focus on what's important, get the job done, avoid what's not important, and stay on track? And that's because at the end of the day, and I think both Chris, both comments have mentioned it, it's the creation of the kinds of gifts in which people can bring their brains, gifts, hearts, talents, and energy to the realization of a vision. And that's what happens. When life gets hard and we have our budget is cut by 50% and the time to get the work done has been cut by 20% and we're still supposed to create a quality product, what do? And a lot of times, many of us go into emergency mode, which means our brains stop working. And it's the leaders that take that breath that, help us focus. And at the same time, really strong leaders can help people realize that they have gifts and skills that they've never used before. And this is the part of the conversation that I like the EQI 2.0. It's a feedback tool, and it's a web-based exam. It takes about 20 minutes, and it measures, your emotional quotient continuum. It asks you some questions, and then it provides, oh goodness, I've seen them 17 to 20 pages long. It's fairly extensive, but it lets you develop a customized action plan that you can use to improve your performance. And what I mean by that is, let's just take a look at, I like to use the phrase degree of engagement. If any of you have taken the Myers-Briggs or the DISCs for work style instrument tools, so that's if you're I'm always a little cautious because it'll be I'm an ENTP or, I'm an ENFQ or something. Many times people don't get the day 2 of training that lets you know how you work with other people more effectively. So a lot of folks say, well, that's just who I am and I'm never going to change. So there's a lot of power when you're working with people who are skilled at interpreting Myers-Briggs or skilled at interpreting the DISC, which is driver, influencer, if you've ever done that. But what I really appreciate about the EQI is you can see this continuum. When you take the feedback tool and you get your results are based on this bell curve, so that 100 is the mean. 100 doesn't mean perfect. 100 means that the average person and you are average, that you're behaving like most everybody else. And so where you see the first standard deviation, the blue underneath the curve, either you're, going from like 100 to 115 or 100 to 85, that means 2/3 of the people, are, the way that you behave or the way that you engage in this competency that what you're doing is very, very normal. And I'll explain what those are. And then as you get further and further away, those are more outliers. So if you're in the green area, then your behavior is more extreme, and you may want to pay more attention, and we'll make some decisions. So let me just go on to the next one where we can explore this a little bit more. There are 5 basic composite scales. The very first one, self-perception, is how you view yourself and the world views you. So what's very interesting here is, the subcomposites, if you can read it, I have them blown up on the next frame. They are self-regard, self-actualization, emotional self-awareness. So you understand what's going on and what's happening. So once you have that self-perception, and hopefully how the world perceives you and how you perceive yourself are in balance. Self-expression is the second composite, and that's how well you express yourself. Is the message that you intend the message that people receive? So sometimes people say, well, that's not what I meant, or they misunderstand you. And so that's what emotional expression, assertiveness, and independence comes when we talk about self-expression. So it's how you view the world, it's how you express yourself, hopefully the message that you're sending out. Interpersonal is how do you play well with others. That's where we talk about interpersonal relationships, empathy, and then we get into social responsibility, because we're all part of a community, whether that community might be your company, it might be if you're taking a night class, the people in your cohort, the people in your ASQ chapter, the folks, in your church, the people in your neighborhood. We're all part of different communities that we have to relate to them at different times. And so that social responsibility is relating to other people so that, we all come together to make a whole greater than the sum of the parts. And then the 2 pieces that are relatively new, that wasn't part of 1.0, are decision-making and stress management. So, for example, in decision-making, there's problem-solving, reality testing, and impulse control. So just kind of as an example, I'm just going to go backwards 1 slide. And pure transparency, my impulse control is right around a 72. Now I'm in the second quadrant, and what that means, if you know me, is I love brainstorming. I like trying to figure out difficult problems, and sometimes you have to think outside the box to, get your brain working in some innovative way. So what that means is I might think about jumping off the bridge, but my problem analysis skills are over around 110. So what that means is even though I think about jumping off the bridge, I'm going to remind myself, I'm going to stop myself, because I'll realize that it's not a really good idea and there's probably alternatives to that action. And when I get on and I bring together people to brainstorm, I always make sure I have a devil's advocate. I always make sure there's somebody who's going to hold on to my ankles before I start jumping off that bridge. So hopefully that's an example that's helpful to you to sort of show you. I could improve. I have to think about it. Maybe I do want to improve my impulse control. But I'm a very safe driver. I don't speed. And so I can just say, well, that's where I am, and I'm going to put some of my professional development perhaps in a different competency or a different composite, as I make my personal decisions. And then finally, there's stress management. And what we're looking is obviously, flexibility and stress tolerance seem to make sense. But also, leaders tend to be optimistic. That's what people want to see, is that you believe that, yes, there's a way out. There's really going to be a struggle, but I know we'll be successful. And that's part of that reason of stress management. And I had a CEO of a startup company take one of my EI for leadership classes. And I was speaking to him a couple of weeks after class. We're having a quick catch-up. And he told me that what the most important lesson he got out of the class was the discussion of stress management. Because here he was, the CEO of a startup. There's stress all of the time. And he said what he realized is he assumed that everybody handled stress like he did. And so there was a lot of stress on his part in trying to control himself because he thought everybody else was being lazy or whatever. And once he realized that they handled stress differently and he observed how they handled stress, he was able to change his reaction to them. And so the stress came down significantly as far as impact, and they were able to shorten that storming, norming kind of period to get through that rush. And so I thought that was really an invaluable lesson. I hadn't really thought of that, but that was a lesson he took from just thinking about where he stood in the stress management mode, looking at his results and realizing that other people handled it differently and how they handled it. So I guess that's what I like, because I am a project manager. I like the practicality of it all. Here is we've gone through the 15 different competencies. So when you take this assessment tool, you really have 20 different measures. I'll show you if I can take a couple of slides from the class that I'm working on. For example, emotional self-awareness is one of the 15 composites. It's one of, and so here it's the quick definition is recognition of emotion and cause. And so when you have less of an engagement, or more towards the left side of that curve, sometimes you might feel that you're often misunderstood. You might be surprised by other people's reactions. Have you ever had somebody, or you've told a joke and nobody laughs? If this happens over and over, it may not be poor judgment. It's not that you're a bad person, but there's other things to look at. When you're able to respond logically to a request, that's where we're going to see everybody in those medium and high, the 4, the 2 standard deviations on either side of the mean. But when you get, and your emotional self-awareness is around 130, 140, and that's extreme, all of a sudden you're very self-indulgent. It's you're so self-aware that you don't have time to be aware of anybody else. Some people might call that narcissism, or other people, I don't know if you've ever worked with folks who are just inattentive to realities. They don't see. They have a totally different perception of what's going on. And again, they could only be looking at how they're affected versus how other people are affected. And so that's an example of where those extremes can go. When we look at empathy, that's a sensitivity to others' needs. That's part of, playing well with others and the interdependence. So, if people are extremely self-centered, very narcissistic, then they'll have very little empathy for other people. The same thing with some folks who are just emotionally detached. And, again, it's not that they're bad people. They just have that's where they are. And you can make a decision with a coach, or, where what you want to be. When you're very attuned to other people's feelings, you're in the medium-high range. When you are in the extremes, have you ever had a boss that was kind of a micromanager, but they also tended to be your friend, and they said, oh, you've got so much to do, I don't want you to have to worry about anything else, I'll take care of it, I'll do your job for you. Or somebody withholds some very important information, but it might have been difficult. So, that can be too much empathy, that they're making decisions for you and judgments for you and not letting you make that decision. So you can see those extremes. And I just said, talking about like the low degree of engagement, or my example where I'm on the lesser side of impulse control, sometimes you are where you are. I have a dear friend who's a CPA and a PMP, and she works with one of the big 4 accounting firms in project managing several big implementations across the firm. She's very, very good at her job. I've known her forever. She's an introvert. If you had a dictionary and you put a picture, you could put her picture by that phrase. She turns off her phone at 7:30 because she needs to recharge. So she's going to be on the left side of this curve. On the other hand, I just shared, she has a very complex, complicated job. And even though she doesn't always want to interact with other people because she's such an introvert and it takes so much energy, she has incredible communication skills. And so she's worked out how to write emails, how to manage a meeting. She prepares for phone calls. And so she is just incredible. She's, all the way over on that extreme. So she balances that out. She's never going to be not an introvert. And so that's what I like best about this whole emotional intelligence continuum, is that it shows that we all have different traits, different characteristics, and they all come together to make us who we are. And what our job is as leaders and managers is to recognize who we are and then get people, hire people, bring people into our group that have strengths where we have deficits. And so as a team, they'll go ahead and balance us out. And that's right, leads right into the plan and do matrix. I think many of you recognize the Deming matrix. So as you can see, we can use many of these composites where we're planning, right? You channel the energy, you align all of your values. As you're planning, you're going to try to mediate any risks that happen. As you start to do, you're going to be adapting that vision, executing. As you work through some of the monitor and control, you'll come up against obstacles you hadn't found, you'll eliminate them, and then as you need to, you'll just continue around, back with Deming's cycle. And I know we're coming up close to our 45-minute section to open it up for questions. The very last part is, I keep talking about 15 sub-competencies and 5 competencies. Many leaders, you have to have different sets of relationships, different sets of communication skills when you're working with upper management. And just, this is another GPS. You have to know when you're going to choose which path. Do you take the longest or the shortest or the no-toll? Whatever you want to choose. But you're going to manage up. You'll use different skills, different competencies with your managers and supervisors. Then you would use with the people who report to you, and different ones when you're dealing with your colleagues. And very often we're working in a matrix environment where we have lots of peers, and so we're spending a lot of time managing across. I just saw a Harvard Business Review article that said that we spend 83%, knowledge workers spend 83% of their time communicating and managing across, going to meetings and talking to colleagues and trying to make things work. So it's important that you understand that you use different skill sets, you know, depending if you're going up or down or sideways. And an exercise that is, as a good exercise, is I like to call the resonant leadership practice. And when you're stuck in a car in rush hour or behind a construction site or a school bus and you're trying to breathe and stay calm, here is a very simple process that you can use for yourself or even take it out to your working groups, your working teams. So you say, you know, my ideal self, who do I want to be? What are my strengths and weaknesses? So I'm here at A. That's what your learning agenda is. You know you want to get to B. And so what tools do you have in your toolbox to get you from A to B? And what tools do you need to bring into your toolbox? What skills do you need to learn? And then you can start your new behavior practice and then go out just like you have with your ASQ chapters, your different, you know, mentors or relationships, your coffee buddies that you have to reinforce, and, you know, your work teams can help you reinforce those new skills and practices. But that's really what emotional intelligence is all about, is understanding who you are, thinking about where you want to be, and then looking at all of your resources, whether it's learning a new skill, reaching out to another person to, you know, mentor you. But it's all very active and based on new behaviors and practicing new behaviors. And this is a, you know, a good time. If you have some questions, there's time now. I've got my contact information if you wanted to reach out via email and you wanted to chat a few minutes. I'd be happy to answer questions, you know, via email, or we can reach out for a time. Thank you. How do you, the question is, where do you access the EQI 2.0 tool? The only people that can access the tool are those people who have been trained in the feedback mechanism. And so I'm one of those people. And if you wanted to reach me offline, we could talk about how I can arrange for you to access it. Is that helpful, Susan? Excellent, yeah. Is there, the group that sponsors it is MHS Multi-Health Systems, and they're out of Toronto in Canada. If you do want to see a little bit more about it, you have to be certified and registered to order the instruments. But it's mhs.ca for Canada, if anybody's looking. Are there other questions? Oh, I see another question. Okay, here's one from Chuck. It seems that successful leaders have all sorts of different personalities. Is there a type of leadership personality? And if not, what's the point of trying to change who you are? Chuck, what a great question. I don't know that any of us can change who we are, but what we can do is identify certain traits that will help us do our job better. And so I think where I find the strength in the tool is it identifies your strengths, what you do very, very well. And part of the report that comes back for those areas where you're not as engaged, it might suggest certain areas or certain activities, how to improve that engagement. But you're going to decide, you know, we can't, just because you, no one can make you do anything. But if you decide that you would like to get more engaged in one of the competencies, for example, my impulse control, I really do. I say I am who I am. I probably do need to improve it a little bit, or at least turn it on. When I'm brainstorming, it's one thing. When I'm working on other projects, I would look at some root cause analysis. Me personally, I'm working on some breathing techniques. I'm starting to try to list all the alternatives, make sure that patience is a virtue I'm working on, that before I choose one idea, I make sure that I explore all of them. So those are some tactics that I personally am trying to do to see if I can't, you know, be less impulsive in more urgent situations. I don't know if that's helpful. But I guess what it is a choice. And we don't, and the reason I come back is if we had one brand of what makes a perfect leader, I mean, I'll think back to the John Malloy where back in the 80s and 90s, we all had to wear navy blue suits and floppy red ties, or, you know, red ties if you were a guy. And then we all looked like little robots. So one of the exercises that we do in the class is we take job descriptions of 4 different organizations, and we have flashcards of what the different competencies are. And in the different groups, people identify what are the competencies that that type of job description would require. And it's also interesting to see, you know, that someone who's running a large financial organization, would the top 5 competencies are different than the top 5 competencies of somebody working with a nonprofit. And so that's a good exercise where you see there's different types of people that are better suited to some organizations than others. I hope that's helpful. Anna wrote, what would you say is the key to getting people to do what you want in a matrix organization when those people don't report to you? Anna, yes. My definition of a matrix team is when you have all of the authority and, I'm sorry, back it up, all of the responsibility and none of the authority. And many, many of us work in that environment. And so at this point, I think, you know, looking at the skill sets, I think a lot of it has to do with self-expression, you know, being able to communicate to your colleagues who might be the manager of that person that you're trying to borrow exactly what you need. We need some empathy to understand whether we have the shared resource. Maybe it's figuring out what, you know, like in negotiations, what's the hot button? You know, are they worried that this person won't have enough time to get their job done? So you might have to discuss some time management issues. Or sometimes it's the person who your colleague understands, but the person who's been assigned to you, their manager does their performance report. And in some organizations, the matrix manager doesn't have any input at all. And so, you know, whose job are you going to put as priority? So, you know, at that point, we're always dealing with some stress management. But, you know, it comes back to being part of that community and looking at the greater whole and helping people understand the alignment and how you're all part of one community and you're all working towards the same goal. So sometimes I call it a three-dimensional, it's really a mosaic. It's almost like a three-dimensional mosaic, but it's all about perspective and which lens you're looking at. Anna, I don't know if I've helped you or not. I can only say I feel for you, but that's probably our life. We're probably all working with matrix teams at this moment. Practice and patience, or patience and practice is probably the better order. Breathing is also very, very helpful. Breathing, you know, lets you get oxygen to your brain and helps you give a stronger stronger communication, and that helps a lot with self-expression. Are there any other questions? Did I miss any?
No, I'm looking in the chat box. I don't see any other written questions.
Norval, do you have a question?
No, I don't. I don't know if anybody here does. No, I think we're okay here. Well, if nobody has any other questions, I'd like to thank Susan for giving this webinar today. We did record it, so it will be available on our section's YouTube channel sometime later this week. So if you want to go back and view it, you're more than welcome to. Or if you know someone who wanted to be here for it but wasn't able to, they have the opportunity to go back and take a look at it. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.